know that this sword has a secret ability that no one knows about? And this is an overpowered sword that only admins can use. These are the 11 best swords for bounty hunting in Blox Fruits. The very first sword that we got here is the Midnight Blade. And this sword is one of the coolest looking swords in the whole of Blox Fruits. It's a legendary sword that costs a total of 100 ectoplasm to buy. The NPC you get it from is called El Admin, and this guy is obviously located on the curse ship because that's where you actually farm ectoplasm. The very first ability of this sword is called portal openings, where you just dash forward into your enemy, slam them around into a bunch of portals, and slam them back into the floor. It's extremely similar to the Portal Fruit Z ability. Next up, we got the X ability, and this one is called Crescent Dash, where you dash straight into your enemy and just hit them with a bombardment of Twilight looking attacks. I just have to say the effects for this sword look amazing. And by the way, the second ability has a 325 mastery, so don't expect yourself to get this anytime soon. And if you want to upgrade the sword to tier 2, you need a total of 40 ectoplasm as well as 15 metal scraps, and increases the sword's damage by a total of 13%. The M1 clicks for this sword do 3000 damage, the Z ability does 5000, and the X ability does 5300. Overall, this sword has high damage. It's a pretty good close range, especially with the Butterfruit, has good stuns and mobility and amazing combo potential. But the bad thing is that it has an extremely small hitbox for its attacks, and it's only good at close range because a lot of the abilities are close range based. And also, just like many other swords in the game, you're actually vulnerable when you're casting your move, and both moves are escapable with instinct. But this sword does a heavy amount of damage, so that honestly makes up for it. Moving on to the next sword we got, this one's called the Fox Lamp, and it's actually added pretty recently in update 20. This is yet another legendary sword, and you get this from the Kitsune Shrine by getting 15 Azure Embers, and it's actually not guaranteed even if you have that. And you have to offer it to the shrine during the blue moon, obviously. Moving on to the very first ability of this sword, we got Scorching Azure, and this actually has the same particle effects as the Kitsune Fruit, so it looks extremely cool. By the way, this ability has 150 mastery, so you're not going to unlock it after you get the sword. It's going to take quite a while. This ability actually has two different variants. One of them, you throw a bunch of particles over to your enemy and just continue slashing them. For the second variant, you can actually hold it down, kind of charge it up, and it deals a lot more damage, and you can tell because the particles are a lot bigger. Next up, we've got the X ability, and this is called Infernal Firestorm, and this ability also does have two different variants. For the first variant, you actually dash straight into your enemy and deal a butt ton of damage to them. To use the second variant, you have to obviously hold the key down, and you basically just charge up your dash straight into your enemy and do a lot more damage. And this move is extremely similar to the X ability of the Sound Fruit. The good thing about this sword is that it has extremely high combo potential if you need your combos to be quick, and it does do a lot of damage, and both moves actually have zero end lag. But the downsides are that you need extremely good aim to use these abilities, and obviously this sword is incredibly difficult to obtain and also does have a very high mastery requirement. So if you want to get this sword, make sure you're willing to pay the price of grinding. The next sword that we got here is the Pole V2. This is yet another legendary sword, and you actually get this by upgrading the Pole V1. To get the Pole V1, you have to defeat the Anno boss who's located at Upper Sky in the first sea. Once you get the Pole V1 to 180 mastery, you need to completely awaken your Rumble Fruit with a 250 mastery, and you also have to complete an extra Rumble raid. You're going to be teleported an island in the sky, and you can interact with the Thunder God NPC, and then you can purchase the Pole V2 for a total of 5,000 fragments. And you actually won't lose your Pole V1 when you obtain Pole V2, so you can still use both of them. But I don't really see a point of using the V1 if you have the V2. It's just kind of useless. Anyways, moving on to the abilities of the sword. The first one is called Hand of God, where you basically just fire 3 different lightning strikes that deal a decent amount of damage. The X ability is called Electrical Prism, where you just kind of shoot lightning to everything around where your cursor is aiming. If you want to upgrade the sword to grade 2, it costs a total of 15 fish tails, 10 mystic droplets, and 12 metal scraps. It increases the sword's damage by a total of 8%, so I'm not really sure if it's worth it. But if you do happen to get your hands on these extra materials, then I definitely recommend going for it. Anyways, the M1 click of this sword does a total of 3000 damage. The Z ability does 4500, and the X ability does 4700 damage. But it does have a 13.5 second cooldown. The good things about this sword is that all moves can damage CB, so it's extremely useful for farming those. It obviously has good stun and pretty insane damage. And unlike the Rumble Fruit, this sword can actually hit rubber users, so that's a +1 to that. And this sword is honestly good for every build, and also has decent combo potential, and both of its moves break instinct, which is why it's crucial towards bounty hunting. The downsides of this is that the sword is incredibly difficult to get. If you total up the fragments, you need a total of 19,500 fragments just to get this sword. And the M1 attacks are honestly pretty slow, even though they do deal a decent amount of damage. But honestly, if you're going to be bounty hunting with this, you're mostly going to be using it for the combos, so make sure you just spam the crap out of those abilities. Anyways, the next sword that we got on this list is called the Shark Anchor. This is yet another legendary sword, and you can get this by using the Monster Magnet and then defeating the Anchor Terror Shark boss. The very first ability of this sword is called Typhoon Toss, with a 150 mastery requirement, where you basically just spin your sword around and just shoot out a typhoon that deals a decent amount of damage to anything that it lands on. And this is similar to the Awakened Doe's C ability. Next up, we got the X ability, which has a 350 mastery requirement. For the first version, you dash straight into your enemy and just slam the sword straight into them. The second version, you can actually use against CB, ships, terror sharks, factory cores, and the Leviathan. And you can reduce the armor from the transformed Buddha as well as Mammoth users. When you use the second version of this ability, it actually kind of changes color. So when you use it on a sea beast, it's actually pink, and it does look a lot cooler in my opinion. And if you want to upgrade this sword to grade 2, you need a total of 10 fishtails, 5 mystic droplets, 50 metal scraps, and this increases the sword's damage by a total of 7%. Anyways, the M1 click for the sword does a total of 2,900 damage. The Z ability does 5,000. The second version of the Z ability does 6,000 damage. The X ability does 5,000 damage. Overall, this sword has high damage, high combo potential. All of its moves have an area of effect, so you can easily deal damage to any enemy that you're aiming for. It also has good stun abilities. Just like the other swords, this has the big downside of taking a lot of time to obtain, and also does have a high mastery requirement. Honestly, the M1 abilities for the sword are also pretty bad. You don't really want to be relying on them. And the Z ability actually does have high knockback, and this can kind of be a good or bad thing depending on how you want to use it. Anyways, moving on, the next sword that we got on this list is the saber sword. And a fun fact about this sword is that it actually does the highest M1 damage out of every single sword in the whole game. And this sword actually does have two different versions, just like the pole sword from before. To get the first version, you need to defeat the saber expert, which you can fight by completing the saber puzzle. To upgrade it to V2, you need to earn 1 million bounty or honor, and then you have to kill a player who's on a similar level with you. And there are no mastery or level requirements for this. The very first ability of the V1 is called Deadly Rush, where you just dash into your enemy and deal a bit of damage to them. Then we got the X ability, which is called Triple Slash, where you shoot out 3 different slashes. When you upgrade the sword to V2, the Z ability upgrades so that you shoot out slashes and dash into your enemy. The X ability changes so that it looks a lot stronger, and you already know it does a lot of damage, and the slashes also travel 10 times faster. You need a total of 5 radioactive material, 10 metal scraps, as well as 10 magma ore, and increases the sword's damage by 15%, so I definitely recommend doing this if you get the materials. The good thing about this sword is that you can get it as early as level 200, which makes it an incredibly good starter weapon. It also does good damage, it has a very decent hitbox for its attacks, it's good for grinding, and it has low mastery requirements. The bad thing obviously cannot hit chop users like every other sword in the whole game. It has slow M1 abilities, even though they do the most damage. Anyways, moving on, the next sword that we got here is called the Halo Scythe. This is the very first mythical sword that we have on this list, but you can only get it in the 3rd sea. And you can get it by defeating the Soul Reaper, who you spawn in with Halo Essence. And you can get that by rolling random surprises from the Death King. Anyways, moving on to the abilities, the first ability of this sword is called Death Cyclone, and it has 150 mastery requirement. And just like the ability's name, it just shoots out a huge cyclone of death that just charges forward and deals damage to everything in its path. Next up, we got the X ability. This one is called Soul Execution with a 350 mastery requirement. For this one, you dash into your enemy, grab them, and just kind of slam them into the distance. An incredibly overpowered attack. Then one ability for this sword does a total of 2,600 damage. The Z ability does 4,700 to 5,800 depending on how long the enemy stays inside the tornado. The X ability does 4,700 to 6,000 damage, and this depends on how low the enemy's health already is, because the amount of damage the attack does actually varies. The good things about this sword is that it has incredibly low cooldowns for all its abilities, it has very good mobility, and all of its moves are multi-target, and it has very low casting time, literally 0, unless you want to charge up your abilities. The bad things is that the M1 ability has been slightly nerfed compared to other swords, and it's also incredibly difficult to obtain, and it's kind of random, because when you're rolling surprises at Death King, it's incredibly difficult to get Halo Essence, which is what you actually need to spawn in the boss to get this sword from. Anyways, moving on, the next sword we got on this list is kind of pay to win, and I think you guys already know which one it is. It's obviously the Dark Blade, yet another mythical sword, and the way you get it is literally just by going to the shop and buying it for a total of 1,200 Robux. You can also get it traded to you, but I don't think there's a lot of people out there willing to trade their Dark Blade. The first ability of this sword is called 1,000 Slices, where you just cut the arrow a butt ton of times, and this literally has a 1 mastery requirement, so you can get this ability as soon as you unlock the sword. Next up, we got the X ability with a 50 mastery requirement, where you just shoot out a huge slash that deals a lot of damage, and actually deals knockback to everything in its way. And the sword actually does have a V2, which you can unlock by doing a quest, but a lot of people don't even know about this because most people in the game don't even have this sword. The sword does have a V2, which you can upgrade it to for a total of 1 Dark Fragment, 15 Dragon Scales, and 10 Magma Ore, and increases the sword's damage by 8%, so I'm not really sure if it's worth it. But at the end of the day, if you have the materials, then why not just do it? Then one ability is where the sword does a total of 3,000 damage, the Z ability does 4,900, and the X ability does 5,000, and it does 5,200 if you hold the ability down. This sword is really overpowered when you pair it with fruits like the Ice, Dark, or Rumble fruit, fruits that can stun your opponent. It does incredibly high damage, and it's very good against sea beasts, and it also has amazing combo potential just because of how the abilities work. And the best thing about this sword is honestly its low mastery requirements. You can literally unlock the abilities in minutes. But the bad thing is that it's obviously pay to win. The only way you can technically get it is with Robux. The next sword we got on this list is the Cursed Dual Katana, or CDK for short. You can get this sword from the Floating Turtle in the 3rd sea, and the way you do that is by unlocking a 350 mastery on both your Yama and Tushida sword, and then you have to complete the Cursed Dual Katana puzzle, which is a long and tedious quest. Once you do that, you can finally unlock the sword. First up, we got the Z ability, and this one is called Revolving Ravager, but it does have a 175 mastery requirement, where you just shoot out a huge electrical sword looking red burst. Pretty interesting ability. It does do a lot of damage though. And we got the X ability, which is Slayer of Goliath, but it does have a 375 mastery requirement, where you just shoot out a huge attack, and you can actually charge this one up to do a lot more damage. This sword also does have a the grade 2, which you can get for 10 demonic wisps, 10 mini tusks, and 60 metal scraps, and increases the sword's damage by 70%. The sword has amazing combo potential, extremely high damage, and all of its moves are multi-target. But the bad thing is that it's incredibly difficult to obtain because you need 2 of the hardest swords to get in the whole game, and you need to complete this long and tedious quest, and you need to get a 350 mastery for both of them. Moving on, we got the true triple katana, which is called TTK for short. And you can get this from the green zone by buying it from the mysterious man. Before you get this, you actually need the Sadi sword, the Shisui sword, as well as the water sword. That means it costs a total of 6,000 belly to buy all of them. And on top of that, once you talk to the mysterious man, you need to pay him 2,000 belly to get the sword, which means in total you need 8 million belly to get this sword. Damn, that is a lot of money. And keep in mind, you also need to have a 300 mastery on all of those swords that you bought before you can actually unlock this from the mysterious man. Good luck doing that. Anyways, moving on to the abilities. The first one is called Wolf Fang Rush, where you dash straight into enemy and send them flying. Next up is the X ability. This one is called Dragon Hurricane, where you shoot out a bolt of energy that actually just turns into a hurricane and deals a lot of damage to your enemy. Then one abilities of this sword do a total of 3,100 damage. The Z ability does 5,400, and the X ability does 5,400 to 6,300, depending on how long the enemy stays inside the tornado. The good things about the sword is that it does incredibly high damage, but the bad thing is how difficult it is to get. You need 8,000 belly as well as 300 mastery on 3 different swords. And if you're trying to get this, I definitely recommend using private servers. The next sword that we got here is literally the most overpowered sword in the whole game. I'm not sure a lot of you even know that this sword exists. It's the triple dark blade. You thought the dark blade from before was overpowered? Well, just wait till you see this sword. And unlike the other swords in the game, the only way you can get this is if you have an admin as a friend and they just input the sword directly into your account. Anyways, moving on to the abilities. The Z ability is the same as the previous dark blade, but when you move on to the X ability, the dark air slash is actually changed to shoot out 3 different versions, which means if you shoot out an enemy right in front of you, then you basically just insta-kill them. Because the X ability does 4,500 damage if you hit them with all 3 of the beams. It does 3 times that, which is literally almost 15,000 damage. I doubt anybody surviving that. And the sword actually does have a V2, which you can upgrade to for 25 dark fragments, 99 dragon skills, and 99 magma ore. Not sure why I'm telling you guys this, like you're gonna be getting your hands on the sword anytime soon.